we are so fortunate as a Women Mean Business organization to have such experts in our community. And we're so thrilled to feature Andy today with All Care IT. And I just thought I'd give you a little bit of a bio for Andy. For those who do not know Andy, Andy Laren is the co-founder and CEO and CTO of All Care IT, a true entrepreneur at heart. Andy created and successfully ran multiple businesses from his childhood on. Before graduating as a certified Novell engineer, Andy started his own IT company in 1996, which rebranded as All Care IT in 2014, when he and his business partner joined together to create Kingston's premier IT services company. Andy is notorious for his deep understanding and passion for all things that are IT related. His work ethic, honesty, and demand for excellence are deeply appreciated by his loyal clients. With his inquisitive spirit and love of learning, Andy has risen as a leader in the field of cybersecurity. This has led him to create a company focused on providing top-of-the-line IT services that specializes in cybersecurity. So we're very honored, Andy and your team, to be with us and be part of our community. And I'm just going to say the show is yours.
Oh, well, thanks so much. That was excellent. So before we begin, we just want to let everybody know that we're going to try and not use any sort of geek speak, any of the, we don't want to snow you under with all kinds of acronyms and terms. But of course, we do want to make this educational. We want to make sure that you understand what's happening out there and then how to protect yourself. So if you don't know what's going on out there, then it's very difficult to protect yourself properly. So we're going to show you some examples of things that go on. And please feel free to jot down any notes of terms that you don't understand or anything that you'd like to go into more depth in the question and answer period. We do want to keep this interactive. So we'll even ask a couple of times throughout if you have any questions or if you have any examples of some of the things that we're talking about, and then you can unmute and please share. So one of the things that we want to talk about is why should you even care? What about cybersecurity? What's the point? Why would somebody care about this sort of thing? And really, it's because it comes down to protecting yourself, protecting your customer assets, your employee assets. So making sure that you keep your social insurance numbers of your employees protected, all of your customer data. This can then affect your company reputation. So it's very difficult to figure out what the financial loss is and the company reputation damage when there is a breach of some sort. We'll talk about some of the revenue that's lost throughout the presentation. But what if you have sort of trade secrets, any secret recipes, your client list? All of these things are very, very valuable. And so the bad guys want access to these things, but you need to keep these things protected. Of course, this can be a real competitive edge if you make sure that you're not breached. If your competitor does get breached and their information is out there, who's going to want to deal with them? So if you protect yourself, then that helps your reputation, that gives you that competitive edge, and you'll probably be the one that lands that next contract rather than your competitor, because the company that's issuing it doesn't want to deal with somebody that doesn't have a good cyber hygiene. Of course, there's the law as well. There are fines and lawsuits depending on where you are in the world. So in Canada, there's pretty strict laws on PIPEDA. And so again, that's why you should care about cybersecurity. And then of course, there's peace of mind. Who wants to stay up at night worrying about these sorts of things? You want to have a good night's sleep. You want to make sure that your protections are in place so that your business thrives. So then it comes to this question of risk. Well, what is risk? Risk is a combination of these three elements: the threats that are out there, the vulnerabilities, and then the impacts, and how each of these multiply against each other. That's what risk is. So the threats, the who, the why, the vulnerabilities are the when, the where, the how, the what. The impacts are the, so what? How does it affect me? How does it affect my employees? How does it affect my reputation? That's all of those things combined together, multiplied times each other, is what risk is. And what are the business drivers out there? So as far as the business drivers for these bad guys, everything has expanded. When you look at networks over the past little while have doubled and tripled and even gone 100 times bigger than what they previously were. So let's say, for instance, you're a company that has, let's say you have 4 locations and you have 20 people at each of those 4 locations. And so we take care of those 4 locations for you. We have 4 different networks to take care of. But now with COVID-19, everybody had to go home. And so now, instead of taking care of 4 networks and securing those 4 networks, now we have 80 networks to take care of, because those 20 people times 4 locations. And so that attack area is much, much broader than it used to be. The rise of mobility and the rise of the cloud over the years has made it so that the attack vector is way larger for the cyber criminals. Everybody's moving to the cloud, and that's great. However, it just makes that attack surface much larger. So when it comes to risk, probably one of the best people in the world to quantify risk and is Warren Buffett. He's widely known for what he does in investments. So he goes into a company, he assesses the opportunities, the risks of that company. And 2 years ago, in 2018, he said, cyber is an uncharted territory. It's going to get worse, not better. And he was so right. Things have really escalated in the last couple of years, way beyond what they were in 2018, and they will continue on that trajectory. So that's why it's in everybody's best interest. If somebody like that says that, every business owner, every executive should pay attention to this sort of thing. So we're going to talk about some key threats today. So we're going to talk about what malware is, and malware is just sort of a generic term, but then we're going to look at a subset of malware, ransomware. And then we're going to look at phishing and what it is, and then we're going to look at a subset of phishing called BEC, or business email compromise. So as I was mentioning, malware is just sort of a generic term. Malware just stands for malicious software. So people hear all the time about viruses and Trojans. Those are types of malware, but there's many, many different types. A keylogger, for instance, is a type of malware, and that's something that watches every keystroke that you type in. So if you're typing in a password, it will watch those sorts of things. There's malware that can be on USB keys that can be infected. So if you plug in the USB key into your computer, that malware then infects the machine. And so these are all different types of malware that's available out there as a generic broad term. So we'll look at the area of phishing. So what happens when somebody is involved with phishing? So from the bad guys' perspective, from the cyber criminals, what they first do is they find targets. They'll use a number of different tools to do this. On the dark web, we'll use this term called dark web. It's the underbelly of the internet. It's where a lot of cyber activity happens on the internet. So on the dark web, they're able to buy and sell databases. So databases that get compromised every day, these databases are then sold for pennies. And so they're able to buy these and send out massive amounts of spam and phishing. Or they're able to use their own tools, such as this one called the Harvester, they can put in a domain, example.com, and then find every email address at that particular company. And then they're able to then copy companies like Costco or PayPal, as you see here, and send out massive amounts of spam. And it's a shotgun approach. They're able to send out massive amounts of spam. And even if a fraction of a percentage of people click on these links, that still ends up being thousands and thousands of people, and they're able to net the massive profits that they're able to do. And it really doesn't cost the bad guys a lot of money to do this. People think that they've got to spend a lot of money, and so they're not going to do this very often. but they are able to do this very inexpensively. They're able to set up copycat domains. So if your company is a particular name, they can set up domains that look very similar, so that when they send out a phishing campaign to your employees, it's very difficult to even see the name of the domain inside of there. And these are some examples of some of the things that are out there. So which one is the real eBay here, if you look at them carefully? So the one here on the left side is the real one. The one on the right side is the fake one. But it's very difficult to tell at a glance which one happens to be the real one. So if you got a phishing email and you click the link, they're asking for an email and a password. Would you put in that email and password? Here's another example of Facebook.com. Again, which one is the real one? This time we got tricky and we made it the opposite. The one on the right is the real one. The one on the left is the fake one. But again, can you tell easily? The only way I can tell is by looking up in the address bar and I see which one happens to be Facebook. But by the naked eye, you can't tell which one is real. The bad guys are getting extremely good. It used to be that you could tell the grammar was a little difficult to read and you could spot a fake. Now it's very difficult. So how do you protect yourself from phishing? Well, the number one way to protect yourself from phishing is to set up what's called multi-factor authentication. So multi-factor authentication is where not only do you have a username and a password, but every 30 or 60 seconds on your phone, a number will come up that you have to enter in along with your password. So if you did happen to click on a link, the bad guys aren't going to be able to get in because they don't have that second factor authentication. So that's a real key. That's a huge one. A second way to protect yourself is to have really good, long, strong, unique passwords. And so everybody always says, well, how am I going to remember these passwords? I want to use the same password everywhere, but that's what the bad guys are hoping. They're hoping that everybody uses the same password everywhere. So we recommend using a password safe, and there are a number of really good ones out there. We use multiple ones internally that we are able to extend to our clients. And then you're able to put in really strong, unique passwords for every single site. And so that way you're not going to get compromised. Number three, there are a variety of different tools that can be used on a business to make sure that their information isn't out there on the dark web. And if it is, when it is available on the dark web, to do something about it. So as soon as a password has been compromised, to then take that password, make sure it gets changed so that the bad guys aren't getting in on these various different accounts. A fourth way is to employ really good software to do a lot of this for us. So to make sure that we have really good anti-phishing tools in place. A lot of this, like I said on the previous slides, it's very difficult with the naked eye to see the difference between these. So a lot of the really good tools will use artificial intelligence to figure out which one is the good one, which one is the bad one. And then a fifth one that's very important is to have cybersecurity awareness training. So you could look at what we're talking about today as a start to cybersecurity awareness training. If you don't know what's going on out there, hard to protect yourself. But if you educate yourself on what is happening, then you can go ahead and protect yourself. So another thing that we hear about all the time on the news is ransomware. So what happens with ransomware? How do the bad guys, what's their motivation? How do they get in and utilize this tool? So what happens is they'll send an email that has the number one way is by email anyway. They'll send a document. So it's a PDF file or a doc file, a Word file, any of those sorts of things. But inside of it, it has some malicious software built into it that will then give them access to your machine. So it infects your machine, gives them remote access so that they're able to do what they need to do. And generally, these things will then spread to multiple machines in the network, or they'll take your address book and send out to everybody on your address book. Has that ever happened to any one of you?
No, not from my side, no.
Well, it's something that happens a lot to various different companies out there. We'll sometimes get emails from companies where they've been hacked, and so then everybody inside of their database, all of the email addresses, then get a copy of that email so that it's able to spread. So as you see in the picture below, that's what can happen. It can go around the world very quickly. In 2017, there was a worm that was called the WannaCry worm that went global in a matter of 24 hours. And it cost an average of about $4 billion in damages. So these sorts of things, and they've even ramped up since 2017. These things net massive profits for the bad guys. So like I said, this is an everyday thing. Every single day there are a number of different companies that are breached, and it ends up almost boring you because you hear it all the time, but that's because there are so many different ways of getting in on a machine. And the bad guys...
May I just mention something here? I noticed in the chat there's already 2 people that have said that yes, they did have their contact list compromised, and we represent perhaps 20 companies just looking at the participant list. So 2 out of 20, that's 10%. So it's definitely happening.
Thanks very much, Cam, for bringing that out. And thanks for participating to everybody. So yes, it happens all the time. And sometimes people don't even know that it has happened. Sometimes these things, somebody has been inside of an email address for months and months and months, just gathering data, gathering in intelligence. And so you don't sometimes even know that that's even happening. This slide is showing what as a screenshot of what's happening on the dark web. So you don't even, the bad guys don't necessarily even need to be able to be good at creating ransomware themselves. There are online shopping centers just like eBay or Amazon where you can go on and buy ransomware that you can then use on other people. So the ones that are really good at writing it will sell that to other people. Then there are some that are really good at getting in on machines or gathering email addresses. They'll sell those to other criminals, and it becomes this whole underground. Somebody. So here's another screenshot of another underground forum, and in this one, there are people that are selling access to machines that they already have remote access to. So if a criminal wants to not have to go through the exercise of finding machines to compromise, here's a bunch of machines that are already for sale. They just have to purchase access to these machines, and then they can distribute the ransomware themselves. So just showing you these things so that you see how it's a complete underground economy that that the bad guys have. Here's another example. This one has dashboards and statistics, just like somebody would be using, you know, QuickBooks. It's got nice dashboards and nice colors showing how much money they're making and what type of machines they've compromised and whether they've paid or not paid. All of these things are for sale on the dark web. Here's an example just recently in March of an email that was copied from something that the World Health Organization sent out, but then the bad guys took it, they used their own domain, they sent it out using the exact verbiage that the World Health Organization sent out, but what they did in the link that's in the bottom, this particular link here, is if you were to hover over the link, it used to be that we would tell people, just hover over the link and you can see whether it's real or not. Is it actually going to facebook.com or is it going to whatever it happens to be? This particular link was going to hhs.gov. So that is one of the US government websites. So if somebody hovered over that link, they would say, oh, it's safe. Except this particular website had and still has a compromise on the website where they're able to then forward from one site to another site. So it was forwarding from hhs.gov to this other IP address, and they were taking advantage of a thing called an open redirect vulnerability. And so lots of different websites are vulnerable to these types of attacks. So you go to a trusted website, you think that you're going to get what you wanted, however, you end up going to the malicious destination where the bad guys are taking you. And in this example, what would happen is that this zip file would come in. The zip file looked like a zip file. The document looked like a document file. It used to be that we would tell people, well, just look at the file extensions. Make sure that you're looking at the file extensions. And, you know, people don't really want to do that. They don't want to geek out and look at, you know, is this a doc file or is this an executable type file? But even if you did do that, this one happened to work. So you'd click on the document. The document in this case said the file is broken. So perhaps you'd just leave it at that and you'd go on your merry way and nothing else would happen. Or perhaps you'd say, well, that's a really important document. Let's see if somebody else in my organization can open it. Maybe there's something wrong with my Word. So then you'd forward that out to somebody else and they would then get infected because it came from you and you're trusted. So in this case, this particular one encrypted the machine. And what's left over, so it encrypts all of the data that's on the machine. You even notice the text that's left behind by the cyber criminals telling you how to get your data back. In there, they say, for us, this is just business. But for you, it could be the end of your business. And the stats are quite staggering. The average ransom amount last year was $84,000. And the downtime, which is much more costly than just the ransom itself, was 16.2 days. So just think about that for a company that's manufacturing something or is in a retail space or whatever it happens to be. Could they afford to be down for just over 2 weeks? What happens to all of their employees that can't work? All of the business that's lost, the reputation harm that's there. Will they have to buy new hardware and software? What about the liability? What about all of the other costs that go along with the data loss? All of these things aren't even included in that original ransom amount. And so what has happened over the years is these costs have gone up and up and up, and they will continue to rise. So putting proper protections in place will help to reduce these things. Again, if there's any questions throughout, just please go ahead and put them in the chat or unmute yourself and go ahead and ask those questions. So how do you protect yourself from ransomware? Well, similar to the way that you would with phishing, having multi-factor authentication on everything is key, so that the bad guys aren't able to get in on a machine or on a cloud service like Office 365. Having really good passwords in place, again, unique passwords everywhere, so that if one password is breached, they're not able to get into every account that you have, but only that one account until you're able to change that password and regain access to it. Making sure that you have very good backups in place. What has been happening with ransomware is that the bad guys will say, well, we will not give you your data back. And so if you had good backup in place, then you would be able to not have to pay the ransom. You'd just be able to restore and move on. A fourth way to make sure that you prevent ransomware is to detect. So have really good protections in place, lots of software tools. We put a number of these in place for our clients, and it's a layered approach to security. And then a fifth way is to make sure that there are other protections in place, like making sure that all the machines are up to date, that they're patched properly, that good firewalls are in place. All of these things make sure that the bad guys can't get in through an open window. So just like, you know, somebody breaking into your house, if your front door is locked, that's great. But what if the back door is unlocked or the side door? So making sure that all of these different things are patched and protected so that the bad guys can't get in. So earlier we talked about phishing. So one of the subsets of phishing is business email compromise. And this is sometimes also known as CEO fraud or C-suite fraud. This is where somebody will really do reconnaissance on a particular company. they'll look them up on LinkedIn or on Facebook or on Twitter. They'll try and find out things about the company. They'll look on their website, see who the CEOs are, see who the CFO is. Sometimes there'll be a new person that's coming in, and then they'll use that. They'll use a magazine article, a newspaper article, and they'll abuse that knowledge. So they'll send something to the CEOs, to the CFO from the CEO saying, please go ahead and make this payment transfer, or they'll use something like a company is purchasing something from another company, and so they'll use that. They'll send an email and pretend to be that company and change routing numbers. It also takes a place where somebody will pretend to be somebody in HR or in something to do with the finance to get more PII on other people inside the organization. And so then they can build a profile and use that knowledge to get to other people inside of the organization. So the best way to make sure that you save yourself from this sort of risk is to have proper processes in place, procedures in place. So making sure that you don't take an email at face value, and if somebody says, hey, don't make a payment to this account number, make it to this one, don't just take that at face value. And also don't reply back to the email and say, hey, is this for real? Like, is this legitimate? Because the bad guys probably already have access to that email if they sent it to you. And so they're going to reply, yes, that's completely real. Take it offline. If somebody sends you an email for something like this, phone them to verify it. Don't just take it at face value. Have those processes in place. So what do these types of scams look like? Well, you've probably seen them on the news. This sort of thing, where somebody is asked to get some iTunes gift cards and there's some urgency to it. Has anybody seen this type of thing? Yeah, so lots of people in the chat saying yes. So this happens all the time. There'll be some urgency. Oftentimes they'll use the name of a person at the company. So you notice on this one, it's John Carpenter. So perhaps that's the CEO of the company, but the domain is different than the domain that they're sending it to. But people don't necessarily look at that. They'll look at just the name that's coming in. Some urgency about, I need this in less than an hour. And so somebody goes out and spends the money. Just a couple of months ago, Barbara Corcoran, who was on Shark Tank, one of her bookkeepers sent out almost $400,000 to a bad guy because they found out about some renovations that were happening at one of her properties, sent an email saying, here's where you need to make the payment for what's happening. She was expecting that sort of thing, so she made the payment. Now, in this case, it happened to be that they got in touch with the bank and they were able to freeze some of those, but that's not always what happens. Not too long ago in Toronto, just over $500,000 was made. Payment was paid to the bad guys, pretending to be one of the contractors from the city. And so, with everything that's happening with COVID-19, there's a lot of spoofing to do with CDC or the WHO, anything to do with the pandemic that's happening. They'll take advantage of different things like, hey, you need this PPE, you need these hand sanitizers, and so people really need these things, and so they're clicking the links. They're taking advantage of what's happening in the news today. Or perhaps they're sending emails pretending to be somebody inside the company about different HR policies. So here's the plan for what's happening over the next 2 weeks. And so people are curious what's happening with their job, and so they click the links. And so again, they're taking advantage of what's happening in our current climate. And it's not just with emails. These things are coming through as text messages as well. So here's one that was pretending to be from the Red Cross, talking about getting masks. And so again, somebody may click that link, brings them to a site. In this case, it was to steal credit card information. And so what sort of industries are affected most? Well, really, it's every single industry. It is a shotgun approach. but there are certain industries that are attacked more often than others. So those in construction and manufacturing are the most attacked. Then you have healthcare, and again, during this pandemic, they're really getting hammered. The healthcare industry is probably even higher than construction and manufacturing. We'll see in the next few months what the statistics end up showing, but they're really getting hammered right now. Professional services, finance, and insurance, these are always being attacked as well. So where can you go for really good information? Well, we put out newsletters every month with different things that are happening in security. We've got lots of tips on our website, but the Canadian government has this website, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. There's fantastic information there that you can go to. And again, we can share these slides with you later if you wanted to have a look at these, but some really good information. Also in the US, there's the NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology. They too have really good information to help protect yourself, to educate yourself on how the bad guys are taking advantage of people. So a couple of things that we would just like to debunk as far as cybersecurity. There's lots of things that people believe when it comes to cybersecurity, and we'll just talk about a couple of things that are the truth behind those. So we hear often that people will say, well, my company is too small to be targeted. We're just a small little boutique or whatever it happens to be. And again, that's not true at all. It's that shotgun approach. In fact, the statistics show that last year, more than half of the breaches were small businesses. So every business is a target. Of course, the larger companies are very rich targets, but they're able to spend more on cybersecurity than smaller companies are. So the bad guys really will take any victim that they can. And another myth that we hear quite often is that cybersecurity is really only the IT department's responsibility. And again, we really want to dispel that myth. We believe that cybersecurity should be part of every company's culture, that everybody should be familiar with these things, not necessarily to do what needs to be done, but in order to make sure that they have that good cybersecurity hygiene. It's almost like saying, well, it's the police, it's the job of the police to make sure that accidents don't happen on the road. Well, the police have a role, but it doesn't mean that we can drive around blindfolded. We have to obey the laws. We have to practice really good driving skills. We have to pass tests. We have to do everything that we should do to make sure that accidents don't happen. That's not the police's role in making sure those things don't happen. So here are some more items that we talked about throughout the webinar. But these are some of the things that can help to protect you, to make sure that you stay safe. So having a good password manager, having one of these will make sure that every site that you go to has a strong, unique password. But strong, unique passwords aren't enough. If that strong, unique password is breached, every day there are different websites that get breached. You need to know about those breaches. And so one of the things that we offer is dark web scans to make sure that you know about passwords that have been breached out there. The bad guys know about these things, and so you should know about them and change those passwords. Next is having a very good antivirus. We call it a next-gen antivirus. For the old style antivirus was it would just look at certain signatures, so a certain percentage of people would always get hit. Next generation antivirus goes much more in depth and is able to protect you by looking at behavior of software. Next along the line at the right hand side is multi-factor authentication. So that's where you have the username and the password, and then having that 6-digit code that changes every 30 or 60 seconds. That again, if somehow your password is compromised, the bad guys can't get into your accounts because they don't have that code that changes every 30 or 60 seconds. Next, along the bottom, having patch management, making sure that all of the windows that are available for a bad guy to crawl in are closed as soon as these things are available. So all of the companies that put out these patches, these security patches, they put them out, they make them available, but most of them aren't automatic. And so making sure that they are put in place. Last year, the stat is that over 60% of the breaches were through software that was already patched. So companies that already put out updates for, let's say, Adobe Reader or Java, but the companies weren't putting in these patches in time, and so they were breached. Next is user awareness training. So again, talking about things like we're talking about now, making sure that you're educating yourself so that you know what's out there and how to protect yourself, having a look at what type of scams are out there, some of the different emails that the spoofing emails and phishing emails, and knowing which ones are good, which ones are bad. That's all part of user awareness training. And then lastly, having a really good backup. Now, all of these aren't the only things that need to be done, but if you were to do the 6 of these things, that will keep you much more secure than not doing them, for sure. So now we'd like to get your questions. We'd like to hear if you have any questions about anything that was talked about or anything that wasn't talked about.
Hey, there's a couple questions in the chat.
Oh, great, great. So one of the questions was, is it safe to back up to the cloud? It is. Now that's a that question is a great question. It is, provided that the password that you use for the backup is a good, strong password. The companies that do, we do a lot of backup out to the cloud, and but we have very strong passwords. Our passwords are minimum 80-character passwords. So we have very, very strong passwords. We have multi-factor authentication. But if you use a very short password, you know, 7, 8, 10, 15-character password, those are not very strong. And there's, you know, just like anything else, there are some companies that are better to deal with than other companies. So there are some companies out there, when they're doing a backup, the policies that they put in place are not as good as others. Some companies only keep, let's say, 1 month retention. So if you don't know that some data has been removed from your machine and you find out it was removed 3 months ago, if they only have a 1 month retention, that does you no good. We do a 6-month retention on our backup, so that we make sure that there is enough room there that you can go back far enough. Pat asked, can I assume that a firewall isn't enough anymore? What about VPN? So just having a firewall is definitely not enough. There are some companies that, you know, they might spend $10,000 on an amazing firewall that does everything, and then they don't patch, and so then that's how people are able to get in, or they don't have very good protections in place, and people are clicking links, and so then you're inviting them in. So a firewall prevents the bad guys from automatically getting in, but if the humans are allowing it to come through, we always talk about that the human is the weakest link in cybersecurity. So that's why cybersecurity training is so good, so that you don't allow the bad guys in. And VPN, very needed. VPNs are something that allows you to, let's say you're working from home, to allow you to get into your work environment. But again, that very much has to be protected, because then whatever's happening on your home network can affect your work network. And so that has to be carefully done. But there are also times where VPNs are needed if you're going onto a Wi-Fi, let's say at a Starbucks. You want to be able to protect yourself there as well. I didn't want to get into too many things, because we could spend 10 hours talking about this sort of thing. Another question: what are your thoughts on cybersecurity of video conferencing with free apps like Zoom where it's been proven encryption keys and VC communications are routed through Chinese servers. There's no such thing as free, in my opinion. What VC apps should businesses be looking at? So that is very true. Zoom has had some major issues in the past couple of months, but at the same time, Zoom has been very good at addressing all of these issues. They went from 10 million people using them back in January to over 200 million people using them in March. And so lots of eyeballs were on the issues that they're having. And yes, they did have some issues, but they were very quick about addressing these issues and fixing them. They actually have some amazing people on the cybersecurity front joining their team. And I think that they're doing a fantastic job. But there's lots of other ones out there. There's Google Meet is another one that Google has put out. You know, there's companies like Facebook that are doing it. I'm not super keen on that. But, you know, Zoom, we're using it here today, but we're not talking about anything that we wouldn't talk about in general. For things that are to be kept secret, I agree, Zoom is not the tool to do. Cam, do you see any other questions I didn't address?
No, that seems to be everything in the chat. Of course, there's so much more that we could say, especially about VPNs. But if anybody's interested in more information, we're delighted to talk to them after this meeting's done.
Yeah. So we wanted to try and keep this under an hour. Of course, I love this stuff, so my difficulty is not going too in depth with any of it, because I could talk for 5 hours about it. But yes, there are multiple other things that we could talk about, VPNs, etc. Lisa, you were saying in the chat, you've experienced VEC multiple times, and they're the worst. They are. They're very rampant, and they cost companies tons of money because they look like something that you're expecting, and it may be hundreds of thousands of dollars that go out the window because of this. So they're very much a big problem. Pat is asking about what the dark web scan involve and do. So this is something that we include with all of our services. We put people on a dark web scanning list, and then we get notified if their emails are compromised. But we are offering a one-time scan to people to see what is out there on the dark web. So if you want us to do this, send us an email at the email address below, info@allcareIT. We'll see what your domain is. If you're emailing from a Gmail or a Yahoo or one of those type of email accounts, we can't do a scan on that email. But if you're coming in from your company domain, so example.com, whatever it happens to be, we'll scan that domain, and then we'll send you a report of how many compromises are available already out there on the dark web. Every time that we do this, people are astounded. It's not something that they realize is out there. A lot of people are even getting, it happened about 2 years ago, and it's happening again now, these sextortion emails, where somebody says that they saw you online doing various things, and what scares people is inside of the email, they say your name, and then they put in one of your email or one of your passwords. And the way that they do that is that they're looking on the dark web, they're grabbing one of those passwords, and immediately it puts fear in people, and they end up paying the bad guys to stop this thing from going out. But that actually puts a bigger target on you, because now the bad guys know that you're willing to pay up, and they'll really start attacking you. So this dark web scan is just something that's already out there. So we'd love to be able to show you what's available online that the bad guys have access to.
Andy, thank you so much. And first of all, I'd like to say, I'm so glad you're in Kingston. Pertinent information and actually mind-boggling. So as once I said at the beginning, it's wonderful to have the expertise here in our own city. Thank you so much. This is being recorded, and I think we're going to put this on our e-newsletter, Josie, if I'm not mistaken, and our website. It's so important information, especially now as well. So we are very grateful to you and Laura and your entire team for being with us here today. And also, thank you for the opportunity for the free dark web scan opportunity. That's very kind, and I'm sure it'll be well received.